everybody, and welcome to another video. Today we are going to talk about something that was inspired by watching one of Doom and Darkness's most recent videos, and it was something that I've thought a lot about, and it's something that I think he had touched on and I think was really true, and I wanted to explore it deeper. And that is the idea of smaller armies in the Age of Sigmar, and that less troops equals more fun. Doom mentioned in his video, and I'll link his video down below, that he had been playing, and has been playing, smaller games of Age of Sigmar. And that people had sort of responded and said, oh wow, that's very different than my experiences and what we're doing. And I have to say, I completely agree with Doom. We have been playing smaller sized games as well, and I have found them much, much more engaging. So I thought I'd dig into the nature of small armies and kind of why it could be more fun and why I think it's the right answer. So, yeah, let's crack on and get into it. All right, so let's talk about some expectations. I think that the core question here is the following: how many models should be on the table for a good game, right? In previous editions, this wasn't always a set thing. That number had fluctuated some over time, like points-wise, and what consisted of those points. We're going to talk about that in detail. But effectively, there's always been a sweet spot that kind of emerged naturally, and it tended to hover around wherever the game sort of drew the lines between some kind of thing. So in older editions where like you couldn't have a lord above unless you had a certain number of points, it tended to kind of be around there, like an 1800 2000 point game, something like that, and then it kind of crept up 2400 2500, depends where you were, but it kind of came to like a general consensus. But because there's no underlying sort of point structure or thing to pin that to, and everybody's just free to play in the way they want, the question then becomes, well, okay, cool, but what do we base that on, right? So what do we actually use to make our forces? And so I think the easy sort of thoughtless answer, that is to say just to let the current carry you inertia, is to still play at 8th edition levels. And I have like, a little sample 8th edition army here, right? Which you can see the big horde, a couple different, big blocks, lots of things. There's lots of troops on the table there, right? And that's not even really that massive of an army. Certainly if I put like, a Skaven castle on here, there could be bigger. And there could be smaller if I got out like the Chaos Rugby team or something. But I thought this was a nice middle ground. But my question is why? Why is that? There's no golden mean is what I would say about that. There's no innate truth to the size of those armies. It's an accident of history. Nothing more. And I want to prove that to you. So let's go back in time. So this right here, I have most of the Warhammer rule books back to 4th edition. There's some I'm missing. I'd love to find them. I search for them every so often. But I have most of the army books back to 4th edition. And so this is from the 4th edition Chaos book. And what I loved about these army books at this time, other than the fact that they were super fun, I love the art of this time period and all this kind of thing, I love the fact that they had a sample army in there of like 1,000 points of like, hey, here's how you may want to think about building an army, right? And start at 1,000 points. Start small. First of all, always good advice. It was then, it is now. I think the start collecting boxes are just the newest incarnation of this thing. But look at this army. Okay, this is 1,041 points. And there are 21 models in this army, right? 5 Chaos Knights clocking in at about 400 points. I would like to point out, by the way, those Chaos Knights have a save of 2 up because they are not in Chaos Armor. They could be more expensive. So same with the Warriors, by the way. So when I look at this is these games, and certainly my experience playing at this time, I started the end of 4th, early 5th. My experience is certainly that armies were much smaller, even when I was playing Skaven, ostensibly a Horde army. It was just much smaller. My blocks of Horde troops were generally like 20, 25 guys. Even if you double this, and kept just literally straight doubled the numbers, you would come to 42 models. But of course that's not true. If you built up to 2,000, you'd probably have some monsters in there, or another kind of hero. So you wouldn't actually even get the full increase of models. So armies were very small in this time period. And you might push back and say, well, but you're talking about a Chaos army. This is an elite army. All right, that's fair. So let's take a look at this one. So this is the Wood Elf army fighting an Orc and Goblin army from this time period. Okay? This is out of the actual Wood Elf book. And I think this is using a slightly larger version of this is bigger than the 1,000-point army in the back. I will say that. So I don't know how many points of Wood Elves that is. It's more than 1,000 points, I'll say that for sure. Fighting those Orcs and Goblins. And what have you got? You've got some Wolf Riders in the back there. You got some Trolls, a couple Trolls, right? You got 14 little Night Goblin Bowmen. Your big block of Orc Bruisers there, your Black Orcs, is 15 guys, basically, right? Your giant block of easy-to-kill Glade Guard is 25 guys. Your Dryad group is 5. 5, right? Yeah. I mean, this is a great example of what these forces looked like in this time. Just smaller, right? But when I look at this, it looks like two armies to me. Now, this might be maybe because they're very scrunched up. Maybe it looks or feels too small to you. That could be. I'll talk about that in a moment. But I certainly will say this. At the time, I did not feel like I was playing with some too small force and that I wanted to have more troops on the table. I felt like an army was a tough thing to put together and paint, and it took time, and life was busy, and I was happy to get out what I could get out, and when I got like a unit of 20 done, I felt like I had a significant portion of my army finished, and I felt really good about it. If I painted up 5 Cav guys, I was like, wow, this is a great unit. This is huge. It's a huge chunk of my army. Right? So let's keep going. So even the larger armies were simply small by comparison. This is the Studio Burtoni Army from the 5th edition Burtonia book. So this is the Studio Army, right? It says so right up top. The Studio's Burtonian Army, shown here in all its glory. That's the size of it. Right? A couple bricks of men-at-arms, got some huntsmen. You got the huntsmen in the little triangle formation they were allowed to use in this edition. You got a couple guys in the wall, and you got 2 blocks of knights, right? Now, that's not an inconsequential number of knights. That's maybe 20 or 30 knights total, right? But again, this is, to be very clear, this is the Studio Army, right? This is like their big force. And this is, I don't even know if this is legitimately the size of an 8th edition army. So I think at that time period, it was just the expectation that it was expensive and time consuming to collect and put together this stuff, and that the game played better, faster, smoother with smaller numbers, right? And when you go back and look at the points, everything was more expensive. So the Chaos Knights from the previous example, Chaos Knights were 65 points base. And that was without Chaos Armor. They went up to 80 when you put on their Chaos Armor. Most Cav was in the 30 to 40 points per model range, right? Burtonia's great advantage was that they had like their Knights Errant, which were like just around the 30 points, just sub 30 point cost knights. They were just humans on horseback. Okay. So why did it change? Why was there a change over time? So the transition into 6th edition, it was so big. It's really hard to explain how big it was unless you were playing at that time. If you go back and look at those 5th edition books, there's going to be a lot that is just unrecognizable to you. if you started playing in 6th, 7th, or 8th, which were all very much more similar to each other. And the change when like Ravening Hordes came out and when those 6th edition Army books started getting released was so big because it completely readjusted the expectations of the game. The way that you got at your characters was different, and that changed, again, as you went through 7th, 8th, as those editions continued. Like, the way that you, how many troops you could get, how cheap things were. Some things, like when you go back to the Orc and Goblin book, some of the infantry, not that differently costed than now. But the big special stuff, the stuff you wanted, was way more expensive. So, and that's not always true, but that is sometimes true. Certainly, like, Chaos Warriors were more expensive. But they were also just absolute face kickers. Just, like, beyond reason dangerous. If you go back in the video and look at the stats of those Chaos Warriors on that warband and Knights, you'll see what I'm talking about. There are a lot of 9s and 6s across that board. And, yeah, it's real scary. But over time, what happened? So the sort of business model of Games Workshop throughout the 2000s, the age of 6th, 7th, and 8th edition, really, was a move toward... I don't know if they felt like they had just exhausted the available market or it's too hard to recruit new players. I don't know what the internal logic of it was, and I wouldn't want to guess at it. But I know what the outreach of it was, and the consequences were that the move was to push their existing player base to buy more stuff. Because the problem they had at the dawn of the 2000s was everybody spent the 90s buying their entire army, and everybody spent the 90s flooding the secondhand market with stuff. And so now all of a sudden there was no reason for those people to buy anything else. Like when I bought my very first Skaven army, I didn't go to like a Games Workshop store, if that even existed then. I don't think so. I don't know, maybe. Probably not in America in 1997. I didn't go to the store. I didn't even go to my friendly local game store, which I went to regularly, by the way, to buy D&D books and anything else I was doing at that time. I went to eBay, and I found a giant lot of Skaven that had all been primed, but wasn't painted, and I bought it. And I got it fairly cheap. And right there, that was that's a great example. That was in 97. It only got worse over time as players came in, would buy stuff, and then put it back to the secondhand market. Because every time somebody bought something, these are non-perishable goods, right? They just eventually will get cycled back out. So the solution, I suspect, that was seen was make the game require more troops, right? Make things cheaper, allow things like horde formations, which encourage you to have these giant blocks, introduce things like steadfast, which are, again, an encouragement to have more giant blocks. And so over time, it just became the expectation that you would have these giant bricks of troops. And what were very satisfying blocks of 15 or 20 guys being a reasonable unit now grew into, 30, 40, 50 more to be a reasonable unit. I don't remember in 5th edition, I think the largest amount of cav I ever remember seeing in one group in any army I ran or played against was probably 6, and that was the Burtoni Lance, which at that time was a triangle consisting of 6 knights going 1, 2, 3 in order, right? So as we move forward into the Age of Sigmar, I think that became our anchoring. And I'm not going to waste a lot of time on terms, but I think anchoring is very important. I should probably do a video sometime just solely on this sort of concept of heuristic bias and behavioral economic, but you can Google it if you want to learn about it. But effectively, once your expectation is set, everything is compared against that, not against logic or what actually might be the best choice or any real innate intrinsic value. It is simply compared to the previous experience, regardless of how wrong that initial experience was. Okay? So my argument is we moved into Age of Sigmar. Our anchoring point was 8th edition, and so we thought, let's just keep playing these big forces. And I think that's not right. I think the answer is go smaller. Lean into it. Now, I'm not looking for a skirmish game. I play Malifaux, and that's a lot of fun. And, generally I'll have something like 6 to 10 models on the table. It's great. I love it. But I'm not looking to have that experience with Age of Sigmar. I still like to have, 20, 30, 40 models on the table. But that's about where I call it. Like, I feel pretty comfortable at that size. I feel like, yep, that's a good army. It could be a little higher if you're playing a horde. Could be a little lower if you're playing some kind of monster mash. Again, just like before, there's variance. There's not some magic number. So, my conclusions are this. The size of armies in Warhammer has fluctuated a lot over time. And the move into these larger forces in 8th edition didn't come out of, like, the discovery of it being some perfect number or a wish to match the aesthetic of a large army, okay? Because it's simply not the case. It came out of a business move. Games Workshop made an internal decision, and we all went along with it. That's where that came from. And armies have always been an abstraction of a larger force, right? If you want to play something close to a legitimate number, you place like 6mm historicals, right? Because that's about as close as you can get without abstraction. And even that's still sometimes a little bit of an abstraction, but you can get there. So these are always some kind of abstraction. Why would we split hairs over the difference between a block of 20 and a block of 30 or 50? There's no real difference in what it represents beyond the anchoring of what you came to expect because of your first experiences. So what I would say is the following, and it might sound like I'm saying, look, you're wrong if you play with large armies, and that is not what I'm saying. Let me repeat that. I am not saying playing with large armies is bad. Okay, we all clear on that? Cool. I am saying the right size is the army you want to play with. If you and your friends have fun playing with a smaller force consisting of 10 models, 20 models, 50 models, whatever. And I'm trying to keep it in terms of models, just as a generic shorthand here, right? I understand that there can be vast differences. But you get, hopefully, what I'm aiming at. Then that's the right answer, right? Because that's what is going to make it fun for you and your friends. The right answer is not what any previous edition told you, including the examples I gave from 4th or 5th, right? My point is simply there is no right answer, and the history of Warhammer shows that, because there have been many different answers, all of which were correct enough for that time. Because now you don't have points sort of hovering over you anymore, saying this is the way to be, this is the size we play at, get on board or get out, then the answer is, find your own bliss, as it were, right? I've said it a bunch, but there's a lot of different angles to attack this from. And so I think that if you are playing with larger forces and you're having a good time, cool. Maybe try a smaller game too. Just, try a little Rumble. See if you like it more. See if it goes faster. See if you, have a better time, find it more maneuverable, find that you can pack on more terrain, whatever. If you are somebody who's kind of looking at Age of Sigmar and you had a bad experience playing a large force, maybe give it a shot with the smaller force and see if it's something you like, and you can, again, if playing more with having space on the board to move around, to be tactical, to engage with scenarios and terrain makes it more interesting for you. It's just a thought. I am certainly not telling you it is the right answer. I'm telling you it's something that I have been doing and had a great amount of fun with, and I wanted to share with all of you. So, there you go. That's the video for today. I hope you enjoyed very much. Please like it, share it, of course, with anybody. And as always, we'll see you next time.